The patient was dying fast. Multiple gunshot wounds, massive blood loss, barely hanging on, while 6 doctors stood frozen in defeat. That's when she walked in. Dr. Rachel Sterling wasn't supposed to be on shift tonight, but something had drawn her to the hospital. As she pushed through the crowd of defeated medical staff, her steel-gray eyes locked onto the patient's wounds. What she saw made her blood run cold, not because of the severity, but because she recognized the pattern. These weren't random gang violence injuries. These were precision shots, tactical placements, military-grade execution, the kind she had seen in a desert 7,000 miles away where she was known by a different name, where she had earned a legend that officially didn't exist. "Everyone out," she ordered, her voice carrying an authority that had nothing to do with her medical degree. Now, as the trauma bay cleared, Dr. Sterling's hands began to move with speed and precision that defied medical training. Because tonight, the Angel of Kandahar was about to prove that some people don't just come back from war, they bring the war back with them. The question was, would her greatest secret save a life, or destroy everything she had built? When the past refuses to stay buried, some secrets become the only salvation. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you believe in honoring those who heal both in war and peace, subscribe to Quiet Tales Studio. We tell the stories of heroes who serve in every battlefield life presents. The emergency department at Metro General Hospital erupted into controlled chaos at 11:47 p.m. on a Saturday night. Dr. Rachel Sterling had seen it all in her 5 years as head of trauma surgery: car accidents, overdoses, domestic violence, heart attacks. But tonight felt different. The police scanner had been crackling with reports of gang violence escalating across 3 neighborhoods, and the ambulances were arriving in waves. At 34, Dr. Sterling commanded respect in the trauma bay through quiet competence rather than dramatic gestures. Shoulder-length auburn hair usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, steel-gray eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of a patient's condition in seconds, and an athletic build that spoke of disciplined fitness routines. Her colleagues knew her as brilliant, unflappable, and intensely private. What they didn't know was the intricate tattoo that ran along her left shoulder blade, a detailed combat medic insignia intertwined with angel wings and coordinates that marked a place most people had never heard of. More importantly, they didn't know that before medical school, before residency, before becoming one of the city's most skilled trauma surgeons, Dr. Rachel Sterling had been Staff Sergeant Rachel Cortez, United States Army, 10th Mountain Division. Dr. Sterling, incoming trauma, GSW to the chest, ETA 2 minutes, called Maria Santos, the charge nurse whose 20 years in emergency medicine had taught her to read situations before they fully developed. Rachel nodded, pulling on fresh gloves as she mentally shifted into the zone that had kept her steady through medical school, residency, and 5 years of civilian trauma surgery. But this zone was built on a foundation that none of her colleagues suspected: years of operating under conditions that made busy emergency rooms seem like peaceful libraries. The ambulance bay doors crashed open as paramedics wheeled in a young man, maybe 19, with multiple gunshot wounds to the torso. Blood soaked through the pressure bandages, his skin already taking on the gray pallor that experienced medical personnel recognized immediately. "What do we have?" Rachel asked, her voice carrying the calm authority that made residents and nurses trust her completely. Multiple GSWs lost consciousness twice en route, blood pressure dropping fast, reported paramedic Jake Morrison, whose partnership with Metro General's trauma team had saved hundreds of lives over the past decade. As they transferred the patient to the trauma table, Rachel's hands began their practiced assessment. But something in the pattern of the wounds, the trajectory of the bullets, the way the blood was pooling, triggered memories she had spent 5 years keeping buried. This wasn't random gang violence. This was tactical shooting, precise placement designed to cause maximum damage while avoiding immediate death. "Get me 2 units of O-negative stat," Rachel ordered, her voice still controlled but carrying an edge that made everyone in the trauma bay move faster. "And call OR3, tell them we're coming up hot." Dr. James Crawford, a second-year surgery resident, looked up from where he was trying to establish IV access. "Dr. Sterling, vitals are crashing. BP is 60/40 and dropping." Rachel's hands moved with increasing speed and precision as she opened the patient's chest to assess internal damage. 60. What she found made her pause for just a moment. Not because the injuries were beyond her skill, but because they were exactly the type of battlefield trauma she had become legendary for treating in a very different setting. "Dr. Crawford, I need you to maintain pressure here," she instructed, guiding his hands to a specific position. "Maria, get me a thoracotomy tray and someone page anesthesia. We're not going to make it to the OR." This was the moment when something fundamental shifted in Rachel Sterling's demeanor. The precise, careful trauma surgeon began to move with a different kind of urgency, her hands working with speed and confidence that seemed to come from a place beyond medical school training. "Dr. Sterling," ventured Dr. Lisa Park, the attending physician overseeing the trauma bay, "are you planning to operate here? That's highly irregular for injuries this severe." Rachel's steel-gray eyes met Dr. Park's for just a moment. Sometimes irregular is what saves lives. What happened next would be talked about in Metro General's halls for years to come. Dr. Rachel Sterling performed emergency surgery in the trauma bay with a speed and precision that seemed to defy explanation. Her hands moved as if guided by muscle memory that went far beyond her civilian training. She spoke in short, clipped commands that made the entire medical team respond with military-like efficiency. But it was the way she handled the chaos that made veteran nurses stop and stare. When 3 more gunshot victims arrived simultaneously, when the trauma bay filled with the sounds of multiple medical emergencies, when residents began to panic at the sheer volume of critical patients, Dr. Sterling became someone else entirely. "Maria, take trauma 2. Dr. Crawford, you're with trauma 3. Dr. Park, coordinate with blood bank." "We're going to need everything they have," Rachel ordered, never pausing in her work on the first patient. Her voice carried an authority that had nothing to do with hospital hierarchy and everything to do with someone who had commanded life-and-death situations under far worse conditions. As she worked, Dr. Sterling's movements became increasingly precise, increasingly confident. This wasn't just medical training. This was something else, something earned in places where medical textbooks were useless and improvisation meant the difference between life and death. When she reached up to adjust the surgical light, her scrub sleeve shifted slightly, revealing a glimpse of black ink on her shoulder. Intricate angel wings wrapped around a combat medic symbol that made Maria Santos do a double-take. "How is she doing this?" Dr. Crawford whispered to Maria Santos as they watched Rachel coordinate care for 4 critical patients simultaneously while performing surgery on the most severely wounded. Maria, who had worked emergency medicine long enough to recognize something beyond normal training, just shook her head. "I don't know, but I've never seen anything like it." The surgery took 93 minutes. When Rachel finally stepped back from the table, her scrubs were covered in blood, her hands steady despite the intensity of the procedure. The patient's vitals had stabilized, his breathing was strong, and the internal bleeding had been stopped through a combination of surgical techniques that several witnesses would later describe as unlike anything they had learned in medical school. "Outstanding work, Dr. Sterling," Dr. Park said, her voice carrying genuine admiration. "That was some of the most impressive trauma surgery I've ever witnessed. Where did you learn to work under that kind of pressure?" For just a moment, Rachel's carefully maintained composure flickered. "You learn to adapt," she said simply. But Dr. Crawford, who had been watching Rachel's techniques closely, wasn't satisfied with that explanation. "Dr. Sterling, Some of the procedures you used tonight, they seemed almost like field surgery, like military techniques adapted for civilian use. Rachel's steel-gray eyes fixed on the young resident. Dr. Crawford, the patient is stable. That's what matters. It was Maria Santos who first put the pieces together. During her break, she found herself thinking about the way Dr. Sterling had moved, the way she had commanded the trauma bay, the almost military precision of her orders. Something about it felt familiar, like watching someone slip back into training that had been dormant but never forgotten. Maria had a brother who had served in Afghanistan, and she had heard enough stories to recognize certain signs. The way Dr. Sterling assessed wounds, the speed with which she triaged multiple patients, the calm authority under extreme pressure, and now the glimpse of that distinctive tattoo. These weren't just the skills of an excellent civilian trauma surgeon. "Dr. Sterling," Maria said quietly, when she found Rachel in the break room an hour later, "can I ask you something?" Rachel looked up from the chart she was reviewing, instinctively adjusting her scrub top to ensure her shoulder was covered. "Of course." "Tonight, the way you handled that trauma bay, I've never seen anything like it. My brother served in Afghanistan, and he's told me stories about combat medics who could work miracles under fire. Tonight, you reminded me of those stories." Maria paused, then added gently, "And that tattoo I saw, those angel wings with the medic symbol, that's not something civilians usually get." For a long moment, Rachel said nothing, her hand unconsciously moving to her shoulder where the tattoo lay hidden beneath her scrubs. Then, so quietly that Maria almost missed it, she said, "Some experiences change how you see medicine forever." "Were you deployed?" Maria asked gently. Rachel's hands stilled on the chart. "That's not something I discuss at work." But Maria had her answer. "Thank you," she said simply, "for whatever you did over there, and for what you did tonight." After Maria left, Rachel sat alone in the break room, staring at her hands. For 5 years, she had successfully compartmentalized her military service, keeping Staff Sergeant Rachel Cortez buried beneath Dr. Rachel Sterling's civilian identity. Tonight, that carefully maintained separation had cracked. She remembered the decision to change her name when she entered medical school, the deliberate choice to never mention her military service, the gradual construction of a professional identity that had nothing to do with the 3 tours she had served in Afghanistan's most dangerous provinces. But tonight, when lives hung in the balance and civilian medical training wasn't enough, Staff Sergeant Cortez had emerged. And for the first time in 5 years, Dr. Rachel Sterling had to confront the fact that some parts of herself could never be completely left behind. The next morning brought consequences she hadn't anticipated. Dr. Morrison, the department chief, called her into his office with questions about her unconventional procedures. Dr. Park submitted a report praising her work but noting techniques that seemed to fall outside standard protocol. Most significantly, Dr. Crawford had spent the night researching the surgical methods he had witnessed, trying to understand how they differed from conventional trauma surgery. "Dr. Sterling," Dr. Morrison began, "last night's performance was remarkable. You saved lives that should have been lost. But I need to understand how you developed these techniques." Rachel had prepared for this conversation during her sleepless night. "Dr. Morrison, I've studied various approaches to trauma surgery, including military medical techniques that can be adapted for civilian use." "Studied?" Dr. Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Dr. Sterling, what you demonstrated last night went beyond study. That was practical experience." The carefully constructed wall between her 2 identities was beginning to crumble. "Sir, I've had experiences that enhanced my medical training." "Dr. Sterling," Dr. Morrison said gently, "I've been practicing emergency medicine for 25 years. What I witnessed last night was combat medicine." "Were you deployed?" The question hung in the air between them. Rachel realized that after 5 years of hiding, after building an entire professional identity around keeping her military service secret, the moment of truth had arrived. "Yes," she said quietly. 3 tours, Afghanistan, 10th Mountain Division. Dr. Morrison leaned back in his chair, processing this information. "Staff Sergeant?" "Yes, sir." "Combat medic?" "Among other things." For a long moment they sat in silence. Then Dr. Morrison smiled. "Dr. Sterling, why didn't you ever mention this? Military medical experience is incredibly valuable in trauma surgery." Rachel's carefully rehearsed explanations suddenly seemed inadequate. "I wanted my work to be judged on its own merits, not on my background." "Dr. Sterling," Dr. Morrison said, "last night your background saved 4 lives. The techniques you used, the way you managed multiple critical patients under pressure, that's not something you can learn in medical school. That's combat experience applied to civilian medicine." As word of Rachel's military background began to spread through the hospital, she found herself facing something she had avoided for 5 years: questions about her service, recognition of her dual expertise, and the gradual emergence of Staff Sergeant Cortez from the carefully constructed shell of Dr. Sterling. The transformation wasn't comfortable. For 5 years, she had been able to practice medicine without the weight of her combat experiences, without the memories that came with treating trauma that looked too much like what she had seen in Afghanistan. Now, those 2 worlds were beginning to merge. But as she returned to the trauma bay for her next shift, Rachel realized something unexpected. For the first time in 5 years, she felt complete. The surgical skills she had learned in field hospitals under enemy fire could serve a new purpose in civilian emergency rooms. The calm under pressure that had been forged in combat could save lives in a different kind of battlefield. Dr. Crawford approached her during a quiet moment. "Dr. Sterling, I wanted to thank you for what you taught me last night, and I wanted you to know, I looked up some of the techniques you used. They're incredible." "Dr. Crawford, those techniques come with a cost," Rachel said quietly. "They're effective because they were developed under the worst possible circumstances." "I understand," he replied, "but they also save lives, and maybe that's what matters most." As Rachel prepared for another night in the trauma bay, she reflected on the unexpected turn her carefully controlled life had taken. For 5 years, she had run from her identity as Staff Sergeant Cortez, believing that her military experience was something to be hidden rather than honored. Tonight she would enter the trauma bay as Dr. Rachel Sterling, but she would no longer deny the combat medic who lived within her. Some skills were too valuable to hide, some experiences too important to waste, and some identities too integral to deny. The Angel of Kandahar had found a new battlefield, and this time she wouldn't hide her wings. ___. This story was brought to you by Quiet Tale Studio. Subscribe for more stories of veterans who continue to serve in unexpected ways, carrying their training and courage into civilian life, where they save lives every day. Tell us in the comments, do you know a veteran who uses their military skills in their civilian career? Share their story. Every veteran's continued service deserves recognition. And don't forget to let us know which city you're watching from today. We love connecting with our global community of people who appreciate these stories of service that never truly ends.